Hello, students, and welcome back to World Civilizations. So, in today's class period, we're going to be delving specifically into the Renaissance period and talking about the key features of this time in Europe. Please title your notes for today Patronage and Renaissance Life. So, just taking a look at this title slide, you can see one of the key features of this chapter is artwork and painting, which is a quintessential aspect of the Renaissance, mostly because it really signifies how dramatically a change occurs in mindset, transitioning from Middle Age artwork and architecture to this new use of color and space and architectural design and symmetry really demonstrates how different the Renaissance is from the hundreds of years that preceded it. So, to begin, let's just take a look at some changes in Europe. It's important to note that during this time, people actually took a step away from the church in some cases. Much of Europe still remained largely very religious. However, after so many people had died from the Black Death, some did lose faith in God, and also because people were making more money, society as a whole became more materialistic, more interested in personal possessions, in artwork, in their homes, and what they owned. And naturally, as a result of that, they moved away from their devout worship of God and the church. Just to show you like a typical family, you can see much more extravagant than what you would have seen during the Middle Ages, a more proper clothing, a more complete table with like goods and food. Again, the economy was largely flourishing during the early Renaissance because of the mass decline in human population. Therefore, those who were left alive were making more money, the economy was booming, and typically people's lives were much better or more profitable during this time than the one that preceded it. It's also important to note this was also mentioned in the previous lesson, but after the Ottomans took Constantinople and renamed it Istanbul, many scholars who were Christian fled from that city and moved into the Holy Roman Empire as well as Italy, specifically Florence, which is the birthplace of the Renaissance, bringing many classical ideas with them, scripture, writing about ancient Roman classicalism, and they start to use those ideas to make columns and large buildings and bring back a lot of the technological advancements that had been lost to time and antiquity. This is the political composition of Europe at the time of the Renaissance. So you can see that many countries have began forming during this time. If you take AP Modern Euro, you'll delve more into the formation of these specific countries. But at this point, we have countries like France and Spain and England, and then, of course, the Holy Roman Empire, which we talked about its development in the previous lesson. Florence, Italy, again, is going to be considered the birthplace of the Renaissance. Italy is not a country in itself at this time, but rather a collection of city-states that are ruled by powerful families, most notably the Medici, who we'll talk about in just a moment. Italy is largely seen as the birthplace of the Renaissance because it is a peninsula that juts out into the Mediterranean Sea, the number one port location in all of Europe. So many of the ideas that are coming from the Middle East, that are coming from Asia, from scholars, goes through Italy first. So what I'd like you to do is pause the video here and answer this question from the courtier. And the question is, what is the Renaissance man? So pause the video here and answer the question. Just to point out a few important things to you, the Renaissance man is said to be someone who is bold, takes risks, is ambitious. Also, someone who is well versed in many different backgrounds like poetry, history, reading and writing. You can see that many of the ideas are actually borrowed from the Middle East, where like learning and literature and reading were the most important or most coveted traits for a person to have. Those things are going to become essential during the Renaissance, a very different, thought than what we would have seen during the Middle Ages, where manliness and masculinity and fighting were, more prioritized. Now scholarship and being smart and being wise are equally as important. So In terms of politics in Italy, during the Middle Ages, Italy was ruled by several powerful families. As I previously mentioned, the Medici were the most powerful, a family of bankers who really made their fortune by giving loans to government officials as well as other wealthy noblemen, and largely they were pulling strings behind the scenes. In a future lesson, we'll delve more into the Medici specifically and talk about some of their specific family members. But this has actually inspired many different television series and movies about their workings behind the scenes. There were several different popes who originated from the Medici family, and the Medici family had a large amount of influence over several popes as well. You can see their house sigil over there on the left-hand side of the screen. Just to show you the timeline of the Medici, they will be around for several decades. And all of these men will have enormous amounts of influence over politics, not only in Italy, but all of Europe. One notable story from the Renaissance that I think is quintessential for this time period comes in the form of a man named Brunelleschi. The Medici commissioned Brunelleschi to finish the Church of San Lorenzo. Essentially, they start building this church using classical styles with pillars and columns and a lot of classical features of ancient Rome, but they don't have the mathematical understanding to finish the structure and finish the dome on top. And the Renaissance is all about pushing people, pushing humans, pushing man to their limit and demonstrating that people can really accomplish anything. Brunelleschi basically studies Roman classical designs and creates a complex dome with several different supports inside of it. So it's like several different domes on top of itself that can sustain itself. And it still stands to this day. You can see here, this is the Church of San Lorenzo. The dome is what he added. And really, again, it's like symbolic for the Renaissance. There was this massive hole in the roof, right? Kind of like a hole like left by like the Black Death and these horrible things that Europe endured. And then it literally rose up over Europe in the same way that the Renaissance did. A total marvel in engineering for the time. Just a quick word on the Medici. One fascinating story that is often cited, the Medici family was at war, like behind the scenes, with several other families in Italy and Europe. They would contract mercenaries and small militaries to fight on their behalf. In one very famous instance, one rival family grew so jealous of the Medici that they plotted to kill Lorenzo de' Medici and his brother while they were attending Mass. They succeeded in killing Lorenzo's brother, and he was so infuriated that he had his attackers publicly killed, nearly completely eliminating the rival family's family line. So, in terms of legacy, the Medici remained in power behind the scenes from 1169 to 1737, again for decades and decades. They would also intermarry with several royal families to even further their power, and again, even produced some popes. The Medici were responsible for commissioning several different artists and writers: Botticelli, Michelangelo, Donatello, several of the names of Renaissance artists you might have actually have heard before because they are used in the popular children's television series and comic book series, The Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. So, in terms of patronage and financing these artists, take a look at this primary source. This is actually from a patron or a wealthy person during the Renaissance, and this is a letter that she's writing to Leonardo da Vinci. She writes, "Hearing that you are settled at Florence, we have begun to hope that our cherished desire to obtain a work by your hand might be at length realized." So, for the question that follows, it really is asking what is patronage? And it's about financial support for these artists and these builders and these thinkers to basically give them money to finance what they're doing. And again, because more money is flowing at the time, it really makes it possible to accomplish this. So again, patrons are people who are offering financial support to these thinkers. And patrons could be from the Christian church, from powerful families, really for anyone. And they're going to be sponsoring a lot of this architecture and artwork. Think of the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. Think of all those famous examples from Italy, all that artwork. It's all going to originate during this time. One last important side note for this time period that's worth noting comes from a famous work called The Prince. This is a book, this is not a person. This is from Machiavelli. So, what I'd like you to do is pause the video here, read through the document, and then just answer the question that follows. And the question is, according to Machiavelli, what should a successful ruler be like? Think critically as you're looking at the document. It might not be quite what you're expecting. Think of the ruthlessness of the Medici and these ruling families, and really what they needed to do to retain power in Europe during this time period. So, just to go over this together, Machiavellianism is a really important concept that we'll be referencing a lot over the course of this year. The father of this is Niccolo Machiavelli, and in The Prince, he is talking about his observations of city state rulers. Machiavelli was an Italian diplomat, a politician, an author, and as he's studying their attempts to win power over one another, he completes this work, and within it is a central message that rulers must be willing to do anything to keep power and not worry about the consequences. It's about ruthlessness, and it's about this being a necessity in holding on to power. The core idea is the ends justifies the means. You may have to make some bad decisions, you may have to do some immoral things on your path to power, but if you are in power, it doesn't matter because you're in control and no one can really do anything to stop you. Of course, this is in direct contrast to morality and equity and equality. So, over the course of this year, we'll be talking about several rulers and how they have a Machiavellian approach to government or war or different ideas about the world.